Okay guys, for this lesson we're going to be reviewing domain and range from last year. So if you remember, I have in your notes, the domain is the x value, your range is your y value. What I'm going to be asking you is state all your x values that the graph entails and state all your y values that the graph entails. So sometimes it's very simple, sometimes you have to set it up as increments. And whenever it's increments, you're always using inequalities, less than or greater than or equal to describe it. So I'm going to start off with the first one. On your notes that you should have pulled up, it says it's asking for your domain and range for this. So the question is, your domain is, how far does this graph go left and right? I'm going to do the domain for every one of these four graphs, and then I'm going to do the range for every one of these four graphs. So starting off on the first one, it looks like it starts at 1 on the x, and then it goes to the right forever. So we would say x is greater than or equal to 1. Anything from 1 and over to the right, this graph would contain. However, for the second one, it starts and it ends on another part of the graph. So it doesn't continue forever. So that means it's going to be in between something. X is going to be bigger than, but it's also going to be less than something. So it starts on -3, and it stops on the x at +3. So it goes from -3 to +3, and that's where it stops, from left to right. This is review from last year, so this should look somewhat familiar to you. The next thing is, there's two different situations here. All right, so our first domain is this point, just this single coordinate, which is at -2. This dude is at -2. We're just going to say -2, comma. And we are going to say the next one starts at 1 and it goes to 3. It's at 1 and it goes to 3. Okay, but there's a situation here. This cannot equal 1, but it can equal 3. There's your domain. And for this, your domain is, it looks like the biggest number on this graph is 3, but x is smaller than anything from 3. So 3 is the biggest number, so x is less than or equal to 3. I'm going to ask you guys right now to pause the video and see if you can do your range for each one of these. Your range is up and down. What's the limitation, if there is any limitation, for each one of these going up and down? What are all the values on the y-axis that each one of these will hit? Go ahead and pause it and try it yourself. Okay, now that you paused it and you tried it, let's see how you guys got along with it. So first off, it looks like on this one, on my y-axis, it starts at 1 and it continues forever. It goes up. So I'm going to say my range is greater than or equal to 1. 1's my smallest number on my y, but then it goes up forever. The next thing is this one. Don't worry about what the shape is. The shape's irrelevant. It looks like on my y, my lowest number that it goes down is probably going to be right here, which it looks like is, what, -3. So -3 is my smallest number. Notice it goes up, 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 up. Yeah, it stops here, but whatever, it doesn't matter. What's my lowest and my highest point? Lowest point's -3. My highest point that it goes to from top to bottom is +3. Notice it has two values. If you're right here, it has a value here, here, and here on this particular one. Who cares? Doesn't matter. When you're stating your domain and range, you're just saying what's your highest, lowest point on the graphs. All right, for here, there's two values for my range. My range here on my y, this single coordinate on your notes that you should have in front of you, is +1. There's 1 right here. And then from here, it looks like my y is going to be in between two numbers. My lowest point that it goes down is going to be, it looks like, let's just say it's 3. It looks like it's like -2.75. Well, let's just say it's 3. So I'm going to say -3. It can equal -3. And the highest point is +3. But there is a certain thing about this positive 3. It cannot equal it because it's open. It's an open circle. Okay, now with this, what's my range? You only have one range. No matter where you go on that graph, your range is just y equals -3. That's the only point on that graph. Anywhere above or below -3, that graph doesn't exist. So your only range is this. So hopefully these answers in red is what your answers lined up with. Another review about domain and range is called your independent and dependent variable. Your independent variable is always going to be your x. Your dependent variable is always going to be your y. I'm sure most of you guys, since this is IM3 STEM, you guys understand why, but just a little review. Let's just take y equals x plus 2. Which one depends on the other? To find the value of y, does it depend on what I plug in for x? Or to find the value of x, does it depend on what I plug in for y? I mean, well, technically, yes to both of those, but the most simplistic explanation, you need to plug a value in for your x to get a value for your y. So your y depends on what your x is. Your x is chilling. It's all by itself. It doesn't care what it does. So your x is your independent. Your y is always your dependent variable. And it wants, on your notes, I say, which one is your independent and dependent variable? Is your hours studying your independent variable and your grade your dependent, or your grade your dependent and your hours studying your independent, or however I just mix it up? Which one be the x and which one's the y? So which one depends on the other? Think about it. Does your grades depend on however the hours that you study, or however many hours you study, does that depend on the grades that you get? However many hours you study does not depend on the grades that you get. Or is it the opposite? Well, how do you do good on a test? You study. If you don't study for a test, you do horrible. The amount of hours you study and your grades are the two factors. Your grades depend on how much you study. Your grades depend on your hours that you study. So your hours is your x, that's your independent variable. The grades is your dependent variable. If you were to graph this, it would look like this. This is the more hours you study. This is an F, D minus, D, D plus, A, all the way up to an A. The data is going to probably look something like this, for the most part. More hours you study, probably the higher of a grade you're going to get. Okay, temperature and time. Like right now, I am recording this at my house, and I am sweating like an absolute pig because it's so hot and humid right now as I'm outside. I can't record inside because I have kids and they scream and they run around and go nuts. And this is the only spot where it's kind of quiet at my house to record. So, anyways, which one's your independent? Which one's your dependent? Which one depends on the other? Does the temperature depend on what time it is in the day, or what time it is? Does that depend on the temperature? Meaning, if you're like, I don't know if it's 12 o'clock or not. Let me feel the temperature. Yeah, it's 12 o'clock. Or do you say it's 12 o'clock in the afternoon? It's probably going to be pretty warm. Yeah, that one. So, which one depends on the other? The time of the temperature depends on the time of the day. The temperature depends on more or less what time of day it is. The hotter it is depends on what time it is. If it's 8 o'clock at night, it's going to be a lot cooler. Your time is your X. It's your independent. Your time makes the decisions. Your temperature is your dependent. It depends. However hot or cold it is, usually depends on what time of day it is. So your temperature is the Y. The reason why I'm bringing this up is because In the book, it's going to ask you to graph certain situations, but sometimes it's not going to tell you which one is going to be your x and which one is going to be your y-axis. And you have to ask yourself, which variable depends on the other. Whatever depends on the other variable, that's your y. And the variable or the unit that stands all by itself is your x. Okay, your assignment, your second assignment, it says 56, 91, and 98 from this chapter, from chapter 1. So on a separate piece of paper, you are going to do this assignment.